Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. This is the show where we discuss everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach. No Stephen Gillespie this week, but in his place, we've got the guest real star of the show. It is our own from NoCeilingsNBA.com, Jam Hines. Jam, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Happy to accept the tag in here and fill in for Stephen. Hopefully I'll do him justice here tonight.
Absolutely. I was glad that we were able to make this work. You were, full transparency, the first guy I reached out to. You were text number one. So you also saved me a whole lot of work trying to scramble and find somebody else to host the show. So I appreciate you stepping up. As always, make sure you are subscribed to No Ceilings across all platforms. If you're listening to this on a podcast feed, hit that plus button up in the corner to follow us. Like the episode on YouTube if you're watching us there. Subscribe to NoCeilingsNBA.com, our Substack for daily written work. And with that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the show. I want to talk to you about a guy that I am sort of confused about as a prospect, and that is UConn's Liam McNeely. McNeely, up until today, by the way, St. John's, unreal performance today against UConn.
Incredible.
Just ridiculous stuff. When you have that many, like, just big, athletic, high field defenders, you can do some incredible things. Prior to that game, McNeely had been on a tear since coming back from injury. He had 38-10 against Clayton, 11-9-3 against Seton Hall, 20-7 against Villanova. Before that, he had 18-11 against St. John's in his first game back from injury. McNeely had been lighting it up since coming back. I struggle with McNeely and where to place him on my board. So he is a 6'7" freshman. He's listed at 210. He looks every bit of that. Averaging 15.4 points per game, 6.6 rebounds, 2.3 assists to 1.8 turnovers, 0.4 steals, and 0.3 blocks. His shooting splits, he is 42.3% from the field, 36.6% from three on high volume, and he is an 86.5% free throw shooter. I guess where I'm struggling with McNeely is just how much value to put on this archetype of player. I think like he's undoubtedly really talented, and I think he's for sure going to be a guy that's like around the NBA and probably like in rotations for a lot of his career. I'm just sort of struggling with the overall tilt of his game, with it being so offensively tilted and some of the issues that we'll kind of get into in a minute. But where have you kind of been with McNeely as far as just like a ranking standpoint throughout this year? Because he's just been a little perplexing to me.
Yeah, so it's a great question about where like his archetype kind of fits in draft philosophy, just in general. But just with him in this game, he's always been hovering with me in that like 12 to 16 range.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, I had him and Alex Caravan right next to each other. I don't think our own Corey would like to hear that too much with Caravan right there, but that's where I've had him, and I think with the recent play, I put him ahead. He's still in that lottery range for me. You just laid out what he's done in this past 10 games or so. Just really this last stretch of games, he's looked every bit of that lottery pick that he was projected to be coming into this season. And then just kind of touching real quick on, and definitely want to hear your thoughts on that, where you kind of put his archetype, because you know what he's going to do. He's a shooter with size, 6'7", works off the ball, is great with movement. There's some good stuff cutting wise there. Deep range, comfortable shooter, all that great stuff as you want to see from a shooter off the ball. And just like you said, the defense, I like some of the tools defensively. We can kind of get more into that, but he's not exactly that 3-and-D. Maybe he fills that role, but he's not exactly the greatest 3-and-D fit. So it's just like, where do you put a 6'7", tremendously good shooter who's going to be an impact guy for you right away? Long-term rotation player, maybe starter or not. So where exactly is that value in the draft?
Yeah. And I think, man, like I think what confuses me is I see bits of more than like just a shooter, and I don't know how to really evaluate that. So I think we should just focus like on the shooting first and foremost. Like, I get that the percentage doesn't look like anything crazy. He's a real deal shooter. He was like over 40%, like I want to say 2 years in a row at Montfort.
Yep.
Like he's always been a really good, really reliable 3-point shooter. He's really good setting his feet off the screens. He's really good running into it in transition. Just like, yeah, like you mentioned, like a really reliable off-ball player. I think where I get confused is just in terms of like what else is there offensively. I think he's a good basic decision maker. Like the ball doesn't stick to him. He knows how to move the ball quickly and effectively. I also think an area of growth for him throughout the year has just been developing that simple recognition downhill. Like I thought earlier in the year, there'd be a lot of drives where it's like, oh man, like someone cheated off the strong side corner and like you didn't really see that. Like I felt like he was missing some really easy reads early in the year. And that seems to have come around as he's adjusted to the pace. I want to talk about his finishing.
Yeah.
Like I think there's like both like a really good and bad argument against the finishing. So the negative side of it is he is on half court rim attempts 43.9% from the field.
Not great.
Like, dreadful. Like that's a really, really bad number. I think his gather footwork is like really bad. Like I think he just has a really hard time getting into his like launch position. He settles for bad angles at the rim. His body comes unglued anytime it's not like a complete straight line. And even with a straight line, it's not like he's a super bouncy fly off the floor kind of guy. I think another part of it too is like his handle isn't great. Like his handle, if he has to counter again, like it just really slows everything down. I don't think he has great command over the ball. And he's just not like super fast from the 3-point line to the rim. So like that's why he's inefficient. Like the reason why he's inefficient is like pretty clear. It's the foot speed, it's the bounce. He's more comfortable off 2 feet than off one. Has to take these bad rim angles because of those issues. But I think there's a chance that like maybe he won't be a bad finisher, which I know is like crazy to say. So 34.5% of his half court shots are coming at the rim, which is really good for a guy who's like a 3-point specialist. Like he does get to the rim more than most his archetype because like he does have a lot of power. He can manipulate a ball screen a little bit. Like I mentioned, like the counter isn't there, but if he can like go into the play with an idea of what he's going to do and get it. And then he's got this monster free throw rate. Like he's been living at the line lately because he is so strong and he loves contact. But I'm just trying to figure out like who are these strength-oriented drivers that like get better at finishing in the NBA? Like it's very perplexing to me. What do you make of his overall like finishing profile?
Yeah, it really is. Like you just really laid out just the lack of vertical explosiveness and pop once he gets to the rim. There's not a lot of craft there that you would really want to see. There's some flashes of using the offhand, but not as consistent. And finding those angles to finish at the rim as well too. It's really going to have to be him relying upon that strength and that continued strength. He's not going to be overpowering a lot of grown men at the NBA level. But when you are already going downhill and you have that momentum and he's well put together already, you see a very projectable frame and a 6'7", 210, the broad shoulders. He's not afraid to use his size. And I think as these continue to get older, get wiser, get comfortable playing the NBA, he'll find different ways to be able to utilize that size when he's getting downhill. And like I'm just hopeful that some of that touch that he has as a shooter will eventually translate. The runners and floaters haven't looked great, but like he will shoot. And there has been some occasions where he's looking to get to that. And it's like, oh, okay, it's good to see like it didn't necessarily go in all the time. But there is some type of funk in the bag around the rim, around the rim in his bag potentially. So that's type of stuff I really do want to see for him. Maybe it's going to be relied on to get into the mid-range jump. He's not going to get all the way to the rim. So just trying to find a way when he's run off the line or when he's running the ball screens, when he's getting downhill, to be able to find a way to be effective in that mid-range area and at and around the rim, especially around the rim when he can't get already there, or just trying to avoid, the length, the size, the athleticism from helping bigs there.
Yeah, McNeely is just it's a fascinating sort of offensive proposition. Because yeah, like you mentioned, like the strength is like a real thing. Like you mentioned those broad shoulders, like he is really powerful. And I think the other place you see it is the defensive glass, where like
Yeah.
he just implements his will and he's able to play through contact. He likes physicality. He uses it to his advantage. But part of me just wonders, like you said, like when he goes to the NBA and it's other grown men, like it's a good sign that he's stronger than his peers currently. Like I think that bodes
Yep.
well. But if you're the drafting team and you're kind of seeking more immediate value, like is that going to be something he goes to, or is he just sort of this off-ball relocation shooter kind of guy? I'm gonna put you on the spot, I guess, with the question. Finish this sentence. Liam
Uh-oh.
McNeely will be a blank defender in the NBA. So you could, yeah, he's a good defender, a bad defender, okay defender, passable defender, however you want to phrase it.
I'm gonna say net neutral defender at
Okay.
the NBA level. That's what I'll go with. I think he's gonna do enough offensively and then just enough defensively, rotation wise, being able to just compete on that end with this size. And we've talked about it
Mm-hmm.
before. I'm just big on if you have size and some
Mm-hmm.
defensive tools, some physical tools, just please compete. I think that's all for the most part NBA teams are asking for. Obviously, they want you to be a great defender. That would be great if this was the ideal world, but just use your tools and compete at the end of the day. And I think that's something that he can do and will do at the next level.
Yeah, so I agree with you there. I think the physicality and the toughness is really important. And I think like even just on a basic fundamental level, the point of attack stuff is a little better than I'd given it credit for earlier in the year.
Hmm.
Like he's definitely heavy footed at times. And he does get crossed up, but I do think for the most part, he does a good job of just like staying square, avoiding negative steps, bumping guys off their lines, like just the like you said, like the stuff that you can do when you're big and you compete defensively to sort
Hmm.
of hang above board, like that's all in there. And I think rotation, like the instincts are good. I think just the sheer lack of playmaking is like pretty alarming. So he's at a
Yeah.
0.9 steal rate, 1.2 block rate, like really, really, really poor numbers historically. And I think part of it's just like there's no physical tool mechanism for him to leverage to be like a defensive playmaker of any sort. And that's not going to be his role at the NBA level, but
Hmm.
it is like really bad compared to like even other guys in this archetype pre-draft as far as his defensive production, where like just doesn't have the steal, like the burst to dart a passing lane or like the bounce to get a block when he helps around the basket. Like there is this underlying like physicality and understanding of the game. And there's also just this like real serious lack of athleticism that I think kind of hinders him from being anything more than that. And that's where I get like tripped up with, I guess my conundrum with McNeely is I buy the overall level of feel, the shooting, and sort of this like physicality enough to think like this is an NBA player. But I also worry that given the finishing issues, that he's like a good passer, not a great one. And the defensive shortcomings, I just don't really say. And like, and he's never been like a great pull-up shooter either. Like his
Yeah.
pull-up numbers aren't very
Yeah.
good. So it's like I struggled to see a really high upside case for him, even the way like a guy like Dalton Connect had last year, where it's like at least there is like this really impressive shot making track record. Like Liam doesn't have that, even if he's like a savvier player and a much younger player coming to the league than Dalton Connect.
Hmm.
Like just not having that like athleticism and shot like take over scoring ability. It's like, well, then how high do I want to rank this guy? But then conversely, I think there's also like that trap of like, well, you know that like the stuff he does carries some weight at the NBA level. So like in a redraft, you don't want to be like he would go 40th. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to, I don't want to put him
Exactly.
too low.
Exactly.
So yeah, he's really bugged me. If he does hit like a super high end outcome, what do you think that would look like? Because I think that's been like the thing that like I've been lower on him than most of our crew, and I think that's the
Yeah.
question that I struggled with. It's just like if this really hits, what does it look like? Because I can't get much further beyond like Corey Kispert, but like with more like ball skills.
Yeah, I think just somewhere in that Corey Kispert to, I mean, I did like Grady Dick
Mm-hmm.
more than him coming out, but I think there
I
are
agree.
some characteristics with Grady Dick as well. I think that's kind of the hope, but
Mm-hmm.
more than likely, I think he's going to be like a rotational type of wing shooter, who's in that seventh, eighth man type of
Yeah.
role. Like
Mm-hmm.
you said, if there was more juice off the bounce and more shot making prowess, then I would, give him some love for a six man type of role. But I think it's going to
Sure.
be that seventh, eighth man. He's coming, he's stretching the floor. He's going to rebound, which I've liked, which he's
Yeah.
done. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
I think over a little over 6 rebounds per game, 6.6 rebounds per game, and
Mm-hmm.
actually 8.6 rebounds over his last 6 games. So
Yeah.
that's something I am liking a lot from him. I know rebounds not necessarily the most sexiest of ancillary skills for people, but I mean, you take what you can get, especially if you're going to end possessions and kind of push some things in transition, and you can be a decision maker from there. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's something he can tap in more to once he reach the NBA level, to kind of really just expand his game and try to raise that ceiling or even raise the floor, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the rebounding is really important. And I think it's just like, even if you're not like a big rebounding believer, so to speak, like I do think that it's sort of undoubtedly something that we see like guys who stick in the NBA more often than not rebounded well at lower levels. Like
Yep.
even if you're like, oh, I don't really care about rebounding that much, or like if you're in a front office and you're like, well, schematically, like we don't really care that much about defensive rebounding. Like if nothing else, it is just like another positive indicator and,
Hmm.
another arrow in his quiver as far as like potential, arguments you can make for him. And to your point too, the transition stuff is big because he is such a great shooter in transition that even if he is just ending those positions, moving it up the floor and then getting out running, filling the corner, filling the slot, whatever, um, that's another way for him to get into what he does best offensively. Yeah, I'm really interested in McNeely. I think like he's one of the guys that I think has a bigger chance to move me during this finishing stretch of the season because I think the injury like caused him to miss time. So we have like a little bit smaller of a sample as him relative to other guys, but he's also like playing his best ball right now. Like he's been really great since coming back from the injury. So often it feels like guys come back from injuries, they stink down the stretch, and then it's like, well, are they bad or whatever? It's like it's a
Yeah.
relief that we got a guy who's coming back from injury and he's awesome. Like that's great to see. So yeah, tricky guy for me. I'm sort of in a similar spot to you where like I'm ultimately just like not super crazy about that range of the draft. So I think part of it is
Yep.
just like I believe this guy like pretty confidently is a rotation player, so I've got him in there. But yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of it. We're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we're going to talk about Walter Clayton Jr., a guy I've been a fan of for a long time who Jam just did a great piece on. So stick with us. We'll be right back. All right, let's talk about Walter Clayton Jr. So he is a guy I've loved for a long time, like dating back to
Yep.
the Iona days. Just really, really exploded during his sophomore season, and has been someone that I've enjoyed watching tremendously ever since. What kind of led you to choose to write about Walter Clayton Jr.? Because I think that's always like an interesting thing. It's like I was kind of paying attention, like who are guys
Yeah.
on our write about, like who's sort of catching their interest and catching their eye. So what was it about Walter Clayton this season that made you want to single him out?
Well, he's been one of the best shooters in college basketball for a while now, as you mentioned, going back to the Iona days where it caught my eye as well. And you did an excellent piece on No Stone Turn with him
Mm-hmm.
as well. And he's leading one of the best teams in the country right now. And when you have a shooter like that leading one of the best teams, I thought it was more than time for him to kind of give his share and for me to write about him.
Yeah, I think he's really just a fascinating player, and I think part of what's made him so interesting for so long is just sort of the quirky backstory, which I guess you mentioned in the piece. Like my favorite fact about him is that he had like better
Yes.
scholarship offers in football than basketball. Like his like football offers were like Notre Dame, Georgia, Florida. Then he played basketball at Iona. Like it's just like a really cool tidbit. So he is like this late exploding guy. Like he really did not register on basketball radars much, and that's how he landed. At Iona initially. One of the first things you touched on, which I love, is like if you're talking about any prospect, like they need to have a super translatable NBA skill. Like if we're talking about somebody you talked about, like him pushing into the first round, which I think is like another separate thing that we can get into in a minute. Like there needs to be that one thing they can hang their hat on. And you mentioned the shooting with him being that skill. I'm like wholeheartedly there with you.
Yeah.
What do you like about his shooting that sort of convinced you that this is something that will have NBA carryover?
the versatility, like it's off the bounce, it's movement, it's catch and shoot, the confidence, the deep range that he has on it, shooting with from the logo, like there's just no conscious really for him, as a shooter. And really, when you kind of break down the numbers, the 97 percentile on spot ups, 43.8% on spot up threes, that's 48 attempts, 42% on catch and shoot threes on 69 attempts, 44% on unguarded catch and shoot threes this season. And that's coming off of last season where he shot 56.6% on 53 unguarded catch and shoot 3-point attempts. So it's
Mhm.
just like he gives you that versatility on the ball to be a scorer, and there's some playmaking stuff there with him as well. But I just love his on ball and off ball versatility. It's seamless. It's going to fit right in to the NBA level. And when you have that type of shooter with that type of versatility, and that's really and those ball skills as well. He's not the most explosive type of guy off the bounce, but he is creative. He is strong. He will shift you and use his strength as well. But I think just really a lot to like about him, starting with his shooting. As you said, it's the NBA skill for him. It's a translatable NBA skill from day one, and it's a coveted NBA skill by every single NBA team.
Yeah, I adore the shooting with him. And like it's one of those things where if you're just looking at naked percentages and you're like, oh, he's like 36.5% from three on the year, he's taken 108 pull-up threes. Like
Yeah,
when it
yeah.
gets like nut crunching time and that's just in the half court. Like if it gets to a point
Hmm.
where it's like we need something, like he is the go-to bailout shot maker for this team. Like if it is late in the clock, it is Walter Clayton's job to make something happen. He's taking 13.6 threes for 100 possessions, which is like a career high. Like somehow
Yeah.
in this role, like when he's on the ball more, like he's still just launching more threes than ever, which is great to see. I also think it's interesting that like we'll get sort of into the playmaking in a second, but it's interesting like he's gotten better at the rim this year too. Like he's just under 60% at the rim in the half court. What do you think it's been that sort of led to him improving as a finisher over the years?
And that's really surprised me as well. I think it's just the natural progression of just getting stronger, understanding the college game as well. So he already had like a naturally stout kind of build to him as well.
Mhm.
But he's seeking contact. He's a tough shot maker at the rim. He's able to find finishing angles, absorb contact, all those different things. So I think those are things that are going to continue to translate for him up into the NBA level as well when he continues to get, those tougher matchups at the rim and the athleticism there. But I think it's just really utilizing those tools, kind of what we talked about, and we're hoping that McNeely will be able to do, kind of with this strength and everything. But there's, I think, a lot more craft, I would say, and just a lot more craft and versatility as a finisher that Clayton has as opposed to Liam McNeely.
Yeah, and you mentioned the frame, and that's like one of my favorite things about him inside the arc is like he's still got that like bulky football body. And like when he goes up and he
Loved it.
meets somebody, he's one of those guys who just rises through contact every single time. The other thing you touched on is sort of his offensive playmaking, which I was like is like a longtime Clayton fan. That was the thing I was most nervous about coming into the year for
Hmm.
him was he like barely had a positive assist to turnover ratio last year. I think in conference play, it got like even closer. It was like 2.2 assists to 1.9 turnovers. This year, 4.0 assists to 2.2 turnovers. He is like really taken a nice step forward on that front. And like he'd always been a guy where like there was another guard next to him to kind of
Hmm.
help alleviate that. 'Cause it was never a strength of his. It was Dennis Jenkins. It was Zion Pullen. Like they always had somebody else there to be like, well, Walter, like he can really shoot, but like, nah, maybe some of the swimming stuff, not yet. This year, it seems like that has come along. What do you, I guess, attribute that growth to? And then how comfortable do you feel with him as like a lead ball handler in an NBA offense? Or do you see him more as like the classic on-off kind of guard? Or do you think there is a chance where it's like he could get to a point where he's like legitimately spearheading an offense off the bench?
I do think he's more of that kind of on and off guard, but I kind of categorize as an ancillary guard. He can, play off the ball, slide over, and be that lead guard for you as well when he needs to be. I do think that there is upside for him to be able to tap into becoming more of that lead playmaker and that lead guard. Like you mentioned, he made just a really noticeable and encouraging jump as a playmaker and being that lead ball handler of this season. So he makes some really good reads, and as I mentioned in the piece, it's not always something that is incredibly advanced. So we're reading the second level and skipping it to the weak side in the corner when he has the help sinking. So he doesn't do too many things making complex reads. A lot of it is based off of his scoring gravity, but can make that lob pass. He does some stuff in the pocket as well. And I really just attribute it to what you were just saying. He finally has a chance to get out there and be the lead guard, be the playmaker, where it really is just him leading the way. And he's getting a chance to grow. He's making mistakes. He's learning from those mistakes. So I don't want to put it past him for him to become more of a lead guard eventually. I think the upside is there. But if I'm drafting him, that's not something that I'm counting on. But if he does spend some time in the G or whatever the situation may be, the fact that he has shown the development as a lead guard and a playmaker and just that overall floor general and being able to have the keys handed to him for the first time with that type of responsibility, I think he's done a very, very admirable job and it's very encouraging.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think the fact that we've seen just this, like, I don't want to say like a sizable leap, but it is a real leap. Like he has taken a very meaningful step forward for a guy who just was not super comfortable in this area a year ago. The defensive playmaking is the other thing that you kind of singled out in the article. I think that's like really worth getting into. Like he has historically been like a go-to stock producer, even with a pretty high usage rate. Like he's not one of these guards where, okay, there's some good defensive production, but like offensively, there's a lot of questions. Like he's been a guy who's been a bailout scorer this year, like a primary playmaker. And that's still something that he has at his disposal. Like he's got a 3.7 DBPM this year, which is like a really great grade for a guard. Like career stock rates, 2.6 steal rate for his career, 2.0 block rate for his career. How does he manage to be so effective defensively at the college level? And then how do you see that scaling up to the NBA?
I think it's really just the instincts, the quick hands that he's shown. And I think really I would love to hear him talk about it, how much his football background plays into that, because we hear about Jalen Suggs and then, his football background and just the instincts that he talked about that carried over there. So I think it's a combination of just those instincts, the quick hands, the strength, which I think will really play well, especially as a guard as well. And I do believe that there are some questions about him being a smaller guard. He's listed at 6'3". We'll see if he actually does measure to be that way. I know there's some concern about that, especially defensively. But with what he does as a defensive playmaker, just the stout build, I'm not really too concerned about him as a defender. Do you have any concerns about him as a defender? Do you kind of think the defensive playmaker kind of overshadows all that or compensates for it?
I think it definitely compensates. Like I would say that's my sort of hang up is I think he came along quite a bit defensively the past few years. Like I think the biggest thing that used to bug me was it did feel like he could be like a little heavy footed and like easy, like turned his hips a little too easy to like turn and chase guys in the past. I feel like this year we've seen a little bit more like walling up at the point of attack, like using his strength to body up other guards. I also think just that bulk that we mentioned earlier is going to be big. Like teams are always going to mismatch hunt smaller guards, especially when we get deep into the playoffs and things like that. But having that strength and that physicality and like being willing to use it, I think is going to go a really long way. But yeah, I think like some of the football instincts you talked about, like his ability to like get into passing lanes. I think his timing for digs is really good. He sort of knows when he can and can't gamble, which I always appreciate. But even like his ground coverage, I feel like is really good for a guard. Like I feel like he flies around really well for a smaller player. He gets a lot of blocks behind the 3-point line, which I always love. Like I just really value guys who can block shots behind the arc and like just not even give people an opportunity to get that. I think that between the physical strength, the just like doggedness, and then the playmaking feel and the timing and knowing what he can and can't get to physically and mentally is going to go a long way. So I think by smaller guard standards, he will be a better defender than most.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess like we'll kind of finish up with like a sort of the stock report on him, so to speak. So like you were talking about possibly, could he get to the first round discussion? I think it's possible. I think a lot of it's going to depend on who goes back and who doesn't. I think how he measures is going to be really important. But I also think guys like this, where there's like a level of feel in shooting, tend to be the guys that can like come into a combine game and just like really take over.
You play one and you're out of there.
Yeah. Like, so I do think there's a chance that like he could have a really strong pre-draft. And I'd also say too, like intel wise, like everyone that I've interacted with that's been around him has like really positive things to say about him. And that's from like, I don't want to like say too much, but like people from every angle of the game have positive things to say about Walter Clayton inside and out. So I think that's like a really meaningful thing too. I thought some of the comparisons he made, like Seth Curry, Isaiah Joe, Jared McCain, like kind of interesting conversations as well. What do you see his role being at the next level? Because Seth Curry is like a name that I've thought about quite a bit with him over the years. Is that kind of what you think is most likely, or?
Exactly. And, that Seth has had a long career. He's played on playoff teams, been a valuable part, as well. So I do definitely think the four is something like that as well. Stronger body than Seth, but same functions, going to be that off-ball shooter. I think he has a little more upside on the ball than Seth does, but I definitely think that's going to be his role. The shooter off the bench can get hot, floor spacer, can run a little second side pick and roll for you. Attack closeouts, do all those different things.
Yeah, I think like there's some of that. I feel like there's more like a steadier Kendrick Nunn is like kind of a guy I've thought about as well. Like I think there's a lot of positive outcomes where it's just like, yeah, it's like a guy that teams could really use in a lot of circumstances. And he has that on-off game is so big, man. Like I feel like for so many of these guys, it's like they're guards and they can really dribble and they can really pass and we really appreciate it. But then at the NBA level, it's like, well, there's a 6'8" guy who does that on this team. So you're going to be off the ball. So what can you do in that sense? And I think when you are a guard, like the wing stuff matters for a guard more than ever. Like, can you rebound? Can you get steals? Can you get blocks? Can you body up? Like, those things have never been more important for guards, and we get that out of Walter Clayton.
Yeah, we certainly do. I love the way that he gets back and rebounds. There's so many small things that he does to contribute to winning, and that's one of the reasons I do think he will get that first round consideration.
Yeah, he's like routinely been a second round guy for me. I think it's worth keeping it on the table. I think it's really just going to depend on like who goes in and who stays and then how pre-draft goes for him. But I think because he's got that physicality and some of those tools, it's worth keeping an open mind on. And Norrin Rad asks in the chat, better NBA prospect, Walter Clayton or Elijah Martin? Personally, I just feel better about Clayton because of like what JM outlined in the piece. There is like one hang your hat on it signature skill with Walter Clayton, which is the shooting, like career high 80s free throw shooter. Always had the volume, always been phenomenal off the catch. Like, I think it's just one of those things where you can pare that down into a role and it's easy to see a way that he gets, at the very least, onto the NBA floor in a regular season game. I like Elijah Martin a lot. Like, Elijah Martin is not a guy I would want to play against, especially at the college level. Super competitive, like has some real ball skills, really great rebounder for a guard, super tough defender. I just don't know that like his defense is like at a point where that's something that is like a true specialty that gets him on the floor.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you getting a shooter with ball skills like Walter Clayton as opposed to Elijah Martin. Someone's going to play a 3-and-D role, but it's how exactly and how well does he fit that role? So it's kind of some question marks there. So more of a short thing for me. And I think you agree with Walter Clayton Jr.
For sure. And then I'll just throw one more at you. Dirty Dancer says, I think Chaz is my 5th-year guy this year. Would you rather have Chaz Lanier or Walter Clayton? Because I just trust Walter Clayton's like overall level of like playmaking feel and the deep what there's like a better run jump athlete.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, just trusting Clayton's ball skills and defense more. I think they're comparable shooters. If you want to say one's a better shooter than the other, I don't think it's by much.
Mhm.
Um, in the shot making capabilities of both of them, there the microwave ability. So a lot of similarities with them as shooting wise, but the ancillary skills is what take Walter Clayton Jr. over the top.
For sure. So we're going to take one last break. On the other side, we're going to be back with some sleepers. So stick with us. All right, Jam. I'm going to lead it off with you this week. Since you are our guest, real star of the show, who is the first sleeper that you want to discuss as we get to the Sicko session here?
So for the first sleeper, going to go home for me, to the DMV. I'm going with the guy in the DMV playing at UMass Lowell and Martin Somerville.
Yeah.
Listed at 6'3", the freshman averaging 13.9 points, 2.6 rebounds per game, 3.4 assists per game, shooting 41.1% from three on 5.6 3-point attempts per game, and 1.7 stocks per game. The majority of that's coming from steals of 1.6 per game, but just a really quick, crafty lefty with a good handle, with a nice shot making and pure shooting package. There are some real deal shot making versatilities on multiple level there with them, as well as some passing flashes, especially out of pick and roll and drop downs and kick outs and skips and things like that. So I think it's a lot to really like about him. He's a guy who I've seen a little bit here in my area at Bishop McNamara before he went to go play on OTE. But I'm a little concerned to see what exactly the measurements are for him. But other than that, I really do like a lot about him as a potentially 6'3" guard who can play on and off the ball with his shooting, the passing, and the ball skills. What have you liked about him? Do you like him?
I do. So a couple weeks back, I did a thing where I was like, hey, like who were some mid-major guys like people would want to see me like just throw a shout to in a column, and like I got way more Martin Somerville than I anticipated getting. Like, and again, it was like one of those things where it was like people like I had like college coaches who'd coached against him threw his name out there, which I was like, whoa, okay, all right, we'll take a look at Martin Somerville. Like that's not what I was expecting. Yeah, really, really polished as a scorer. Like you mentioned, like he's got that smooth lefty stroke. He's got a really high release. Like I love how good he is, whether it's like pulling up or moving to a shot, how good he is at getting his feet set underneath him. Like closeouts don't bother him one bit. And then like he's got some real dynamism, like with the ball. He's got a real shiftiness. He can keep his dribble alive for a prolonged period of time, which I really value. Like anytime you've got a freshman, like I know like small guard, like blah, blah, blah. But I think it's always worth to me paying attention anytime a freshman is making more than 40% of their threes on 10 attempts for 100 possessions, and then have like that good of an assist to turnover ratio. Like he has like, this is not a like small guard who's like just a spot up shooter. Like he can really create stuff for other guys too. I thought like his pass placement looked good. Defensively, I have like the kind of concerns you have with a lot of guys in that archetype. Strength is probably always going to be an issue, but I think his like lateral agility was good, and I think you see a lot of that same craftiness where he's able to get those steals because just like he's got a really high level of feel and knows how to outsmart people. But like, yeah, I mean, in terms of like a 6'3" freshman guard who's like not in a big league, I just don't know like how many more there are that are more interesting than him.
Yeah, especially when you see all these different skills that could potentially, transfer up to a bigger conference if that's something that kind of comes his way. And then what really, you look at the NBA level, making him a long-term NBA prospect, these are things that potentially do transfer and translate to the up to the different levels. And then really, it's that shooting, the shot making, ability to play with the ball in his hands. Those are all things that you want to see from a guard like him. And I'm excited to see how he closes out the year and what type of interest. I'm sorry for you UMass Lowell fans out there. I'm not trying to get them out of there, but I'm excited to see how your season plays out too. It's actually a really fun team as a whole to watch as well too.
For sure. Yeah, he's a really talented player. Definitely someone I'm going to be keeping an eye on. To throw out another just like interesting mid-major shooter, I'll go to Joseph Pinion next at Arkansas State. Spent 2 years at Arkansas, like didn't really get a whole lot of run. Played 150 total minutes as a freshman, 103 minutes as a sophomore. Goes to Arkansas State, which is like a really good mid-major team. Like I think because they don't have like a this year NBA prospect, like people don't really recognize how good Arkansas State is like this year and has been in recent years in general. Like that is a really great program. Under Brian Hodgson, they're 20-9 this year. Like they're always winning 20 games. A lot of veteran talent. He did not have a big role to start the year, but as the year has progressed, he sort of started to take on a bigger and bigger role. If you look at the stats from the last game, they weren't as good. It was senior night, so I don't think he played as much. Just like there was a lot of seniors, and they've got a lot of seniors who can really play. But on the year, he's at 12 points per game, but in conference play, that's up to 13.3 points per game. Dynamite shooter. Like another one of those guys, like Walter Clayton, where it's like the percentage you look at, it's like, okay, 37.2% from three, 88.5% at the line. He's just under 90% at the free throw line for his full college career. He is taking 15 threes per 100 possessions. This guy is running all over the place. He's bombing threes off movement. He's got logo range. And then like if you chase him off the line, like he's 60% on twos. And like not just this year. He did that as a freshman too. He was close to that last year. Like he's got a pretty surprisingly good first step for like a 6'5" white boy shooter that you wouldn't expect him to have. Pretty well at the rim. Like I think that there's more to him than that. And then like his decision making, like his ball skills like aren't anything crazy. Like his passing is like, I think the offensive swing skill for him where like he's just like not a combo dude. Like he's more of a traditional wing where like if it's a really basic dump off, that's there. I'd like to see him add more downhill counters. I'd like to see him make more advanced reads. But in conference play, 1.5 assists to 1.1 turnovers, like good decision maker. But I think the real selling point in conjunction with the shot is his defensive playmaking. 2.4 steal rate, 3.3 block rate. Just a maniac in terms of ground coverage. It's all over the place. Another one of those guys who like he will close that hard and like block a three that like you did not even think he was going to be able to contest. Like I love the way he competes defensively. Like to me, Pinion is like a legitimate NBA sleeper. And like selfishly, I hope everybody keeps for no stone unturned this summer and like look really great later. But, like one of those guys where like if he, I think the world's kind of his oyster. Like if he goes back to Arkansas State next year, they're graduating a lot of talent. It's going to be a winning team again. He could be the guy. If he gets a bigger opportunity somewhere, like I think he's more than ready for it. Just given what we've seen from him in terms of defensive production and shooting, I am like in on Joseph Pinion is like an NBA sleeper. How did you feel about him? Because I think he's a name that doesn't come up a whole lot.
He doesn't. I'm so glad that you brought him up. He's been a guy that's been on my list to get to all year, and I just quite honestly have not been able to get to him yet. So when you brought him up, I was like, all right, now this is the time to finally get into him. And I just really echo everything you said. I mean, the real deal shooter, movement, whatever you need him to do. It's a high release. He does some no dip stuff. Like it's a quick release too. And defensive playmaking, that would really kind of helps him stand out there. You know, he's not going to be this lockdown defender or really do much on ball. And for someone who's going to get picked on defensively, who's going to compete and you can do some things as a defensive playmaker, that's exactly what you want to see. And yeah, man, I would love to see them get in the tournament. He is someone who is bound, like on that Thursday, we see Arkansas State and Joseph Penny's hit like 6 threes, leading the upset win. So like, he's certainly that type of player. And there's a lot of upside for him to continue to tap into, whether it's going to be at Arkansas State, like you said, or get another opportunity somewhere else.
For sure. Who do you got up next on your docket?
So hopefully I got the pronunciation right. I actually listened to some games with the volume on this time to try to work on it.
There we go.
Alvaro Folgueiras.
Yes, I think so. I think Folgueiras is correct.
Okay, great.
Watch it not be correct, and then we'll get a bunch of comments about it on Twitter tomorrow.
Exactly, and we apologize in advance if someone knows. Just let us know. We'll definitely work on that and getting that right. But
For sure.
a 6'9" skilled big out of Spain that is playing over at Robert Morris, averaging 14.2 points per game, 9.4 rebounds, 3.1 assists per game, and shooting 41.7% from three. He obviously stretch big, can really shoot the ball. I really bind the jumper. It's a smooth stroke, very fluid. He gets it up quick. He's shooting 47.4% on spot up threes, 52.8% on unguarded catch and shoot threes, 36.2% on guarded catch and shoot threes as well too. So he's showing the ability to be able to shoot over guys. He's knocking them down when he's wide open. There's some good pick and pop stuff. When he's in the paint, he shows some really good footwork, some touch around the rim. He has some craft with shoulder fakes, shot fakes. I really do like just the overall skill set, the craft, the feel. I want to see a little bit more as a playmaker in the short roll. I think that's something more he can tap into, but he's very good at being able to find cutters out of the post and mid post, along with some functional ball skill stuff that I like as well. And then just on the defensive end, 2.6 stocks per game. Like he's solid on the weak side. He's more of a shot blocker than rim protector or rim deterrent. But I do like his activity, with his mobility and his length and size as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so funny that you like end on the mobility too, because that was the thing for me where like when I saw his stats earlier in the year and I went to watch him, like me and Steven talked about this a few weeks back with Michael Stillwell at Milwaukee, where it's like you see the stat profile and you're just like, please don't be a slow mid-major guy. Like, please don't be one of those guys where I pop on the tape and it's like, oh yeah, he's averaging like 18 and 9, and it's because like he can barely walk. And like I was so relieved to go into the film and be like, oh man, like this guy can actually move a little bit. Like he is a forward. Like he's actually a forward. And like I saw him get a shot from Ignacio in a column that he did on like the FIBA website, like ranking young players based out of Europe. So it's like he's the real deal, man. Like he, to your point, like love the shot. And you mentioned the no dip on the three, but you even see that inside the arc too. Like if he's rolling to the basket or cutting, like keeps the ball high, a very like nice fundamental big guy thing I always appreciate. I thought your point about the passing was like really good too, because he's one of those guys where the assist numbers are good and it all just feels like a little simple for me. Like I'd like to see a little bit more like face up passing functionality with him. But I think between the shot, how well he scores on the interior and how well he moves, and like he's competitive on the glass and like just super disruptive defensively. Like this is a guy. Like I don't know what the next step for him is going to be. He's going to be a junior next year, so he's got plenty of eligibility ahead of him. But like to me, and like again, like Robert Morris fans, like I'm not trying to make you lose out on your guy, but like it's hard for me to imagine that like every blue blood program in the country wouldn't be like tripping over themselves, sprinting to the phone if the second they hear he's in the portal.
Absolutely. Like he can play, I believe he can play next to a more traditional big as well too. So there's a lot of versatility for what he can do. And at that size, the size, skill, and shooting, man, that always plays.
Yeah. He is super, super interesting. Like 100% a guy again that I'm like kind of pegging for no stone next year. Like hoping he doesn't end up on those draft radars. I'm going to throw out one more of those guys here to wrap it up with our last sleeper. That's Caleb Banks at Tulane. I really like Caleb Banks like a lot. So he was ranked 98th in his high school recruiting class, goes to Indiana, just like same thing as Pinion. Like she doesn't really get a whole lot of run there. I think that's like, don't want to throw Mike Woodson under the bus, but it is like one of those things where like in hindsight, the fact that we've just seen guys kind of like stagnate there and not really do a whole lot at Indiana. It's almost a little encouraging to me with Caleb Banks that it's like, okay, well, why didn't he play at Indiana? It's like, well, Indiana just like was kind of a mess and like nobody really got better there. And now he found his footing at Tulane, which is in the American. It's not like he's in, some garbage tier Division II conference or something. He's in the best mid-major leagues. So Banks is averaging 15.4 points per game. He is a 6'7", 215 forward who looks every bit of that. 7 rebounds per game, 1 assist to 0.9 turnovers, and really good stock production. 2.2 stocks per game on the year. Really good interior score, like 63.5% on twos this year. when he goes downhill, like big attacking strides to the basket, he's not limited to a straight line. He's got some counters and dribble moves. Like there's a real handle to him. He has a real toughness at the basket. He can get up off one foot and finish above the rim. Like I really like how he plays inside the arc. And I think why I'm so bullish on Caleb Banks too is I buy the shot. Like he's got a wide base on it. It looks a little funny, but he's taking 8 per 100 possessions and like he gets it off really quickly off the catch. Like maybe I'm like over projecting and like going too much on like tape versus what the numbers say, but I like how the shot like functions. And I also think he's a little bit better of a passer than the numbers indicate. Like I know statistically him and Pinion, like on paper, like passing wise look the same. I think the functionality of Caleb Banks is attacking and his handle kind of separate him a little bit. He makes some nice hot potato passes on the perimeter. I've seen him make some really nice interior passes when driving to the basket. Like I think there's some real room for growth that if we see him, you know, he's going to be a senior next year. If we see him back in Tulane with sort of that high usage role, we could really see that stuff start to flourish. And then defensively, everything you'd want from a guy that size, like good instincts to rotate to the rim, strong chest, whether that's walling up on the perimeter or staying vertical inside. He's the guy who's pointing, communicating, talking, covers ground well, closes out well with like good balance, like arms look long. Like I just really like the overall package with Caleb Banks. It's like a potential two-way player with like a little bit of feel to him. Am I like overexcited about Caleb Banks? Like, am I over-indexing? I'm like, I watched him have that really good game against Memphis a few weeks back, and I'm just like basketball drunk on that performance. Or like, what did you make of him?
No, not at all. Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Okay.
I'm definitely on the Caleb Banks train. So, and what really started for me with this is after seeing him in person early this year, when Tulane came to play George Mason, and he really stood out as expected in that game, along with Cam Williams and Roman Brumbaugh as well. In that game for Tulane, they have a nice little trio there, throwing Caleb Glenn. So they got some good talent over in Tulane. But yeah, I mean, really strong physical driver, as you said. There is some really good flashes of passing out of it, whether it's drop off, kick outs. Certainly someone at the base who's playing that 3 and D role at the next level can attack closeouts and make a proper decision there. I think just really what you want for a bench wing, he does so much of that, especially with that size. And you know, I don't got to talk to you about rebounding, but you know, we love rebounding over here. He does that. He's on the glass there at 6'7". It's a projectable NBA ready body as well, from the top and the bottom. Just a really nice frame as well with good length. I really do see this as someone, like you said, coming back to Tulane next year, could really get in that top 60 mix. I know that doesn't bode well for no stone unturned, but
that's the whole point. That's the whole point is try to get to those guys. So
exactly. So I do believe he's going to be someone that's going to be very much on the NBA radar, especially as I think a lot of the NBA teams are already in the freshman Cam Williams there as well too. So I do believe there's going to be a lot of deserved attention headed his way, you know, because of the role. And just real quick on the shot, I like the shot as well. I know he's shooting in the low 30s right now, but it's a quick, comfortable shot. I know you only take warm-ups with a grain of salt, but he shot the ball very well in warm-ups, good arc, it was comfortable. So I really do like the way he projects forward, and it's looked like somebody next year that teams are going to be looking on, at least right now. Maybe it'll get a higher projection, but at least a two-way type of deal for him next year.
Yeah, I agree. And he's been slumping a little bit as of late. Like that's something I'm going to be kind of keeping an eye on. Hopefully he can like kind of right the ship a little bit. He had a really good game yesterday. So hopefully that like continues to be the case for him. But yeah, like just one of those guys where it's like, man, there's size, there's toughness, there's defense, there's shooting, like to a degree, but like, man, I love that downhill game. I love the downhill game and the interior finishing from him and just how it is like face up oriented. It's not one of those guys where it's like, hey, 60% on twos, and it's him backing down other guys that are like 6'4" that are trying to guard him in conference play. So I'm really into him. So that'll do it for this week's show. What do you have over in the work at No Ceilings?
Honestly, I'm gonna be 100% transparent with all the viewers.
Yeah,
I have no idea what I'm going to have got going on next, to be honest. I'm contemplating a few different things. I'm trying to
for sure.
decide with this soon. If anyone out there has any suggestions about who you want me to cover or anything like that, let me know. But I'm going to go through kind of the prospect names that I have of guys that I potentially want to cover. But I got to figure that out soon. But to check out the
Absolutely.
Walter Clayton piece that Maxwell was so nice to mention and bring up here, so that's on the site as well. So definitely check that out.
For sure. Yeah, can't recommend that column enough. I've got a big Janai Broom piece that'll be up by the time most of you are reading this. I've like become a guy who likes player comps, and I think a big problem I've had
Yeah,
with Janai Broom is like I don't quite know what this is at the NBA level. So I did an in-depth investigation as to like who is Janai Broom, who is this guy, and I had a blast with it, and I came out a very big fan of Janai Broom, I will say. So go read the full article, go read the full breakdown of his game and why I am bullish on this scaling up to the NBA level. Jim, where can people find you on social media?
you can find me at Jam on the Boards on X, and I believe it's the same on Blue Sky as well. So I got to get a little more active on that as well.
For sure. Yeah. So I am bound boards on both of those sites as well. Make sure you tune in at NoCeilingsNBA.com. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to the podcast feed. We will be back next week. I believe Steven will be back by then. But Jam, thank you so much for filling in. I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course.
And I appreciate you all tuning in. We will see you again next week.